Kashmiri Pandits who overnight had to leave their home and earth, including my own family. And my family, in fact, left between 19th and 20th January 1919 and had to stay in Jammu. We were staying in a garage, which was basically one room, and we were more than a dozen people there, and which was actually a garage connected to a cow shed. And that's where, we spent initial weeks or months after the Exodus began.
Hello, very good evening. Namaste and welcome to Citti Media. I'm your host Sharan Citti. Joining us today is senior journalist Aditya Raj Kaul. He has been reporting from Kashmir for several years now, and he is the credible face for any news that comes out of Kashmir, whether it's defense related or national security or even foreign affairs for that matter. Aditya ji, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on our channel. I think it's your first time here.
Absolutely. Pleasure being here, Sharan. Thank you so much.
Today we are commemorating the Exodus Day, and a lot of pundits, including you, know this as a black day, a day wherein thousands of families at gunpoint were forced to leave their hometowns. What has changed since then?
Well, a lot has changed, but a lot has not changed for our community as well. Over the last 3 decades, we've seen the kind of so-called conflict, which is actually Islamist terrorism, that has been brewing in Kashmir Valley, Sharan. You've seen news reports, you've seen the gory images of terrorists killing innocent Kashmiris, of terrorists attacking security forces time and again, and these terrorists backed by Pakistan, creating a havoc, all across these 3 decades. We remember several of these terror attacks, from Pulwama to Uri, to sporadic attacks that take place in Srinagar, in Baramulla, Kulgam, Anantnag, Shopian, you name it. What we have seen, specifically because you asked me about Kashmiri Pandits, is that beginning 1989, we saw targeted assassination of Kashmiri Pandits, prominent Kashmiri Pandit leaders, prominent writers, literature, experts, scholars, even judges. Justice Neelkant Ganju was gunned down in Srinagar. We had Tikalal Taplu, a politician who was gunned down. We had similarly Sarvanand Kaul Premi in Anantnag. He, along with his son, who were killed in a very barbaric manner, even though he was a very popular figure among the local community. So we saw that local terrorists, hand in gloves with Pakistani terror organizations, began these targeted assassinations. And 2 of the groups that were mainly responsible for the killing, assassination, kidnapping, plunder of the Kashmiri Pandit community were Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front and Hizbul Mujahideen. Hizbul Mujahideen mainly having its base or support from Syed Salahuddin from Pakistan-occupied Kashmir over the years. And JKLF, of course, Yasin Malik, who is presently in Tihar jail, Bitta Karate, also known as Farooq Ahmad Dar, Javed Nalka, and the Haji group that was known at that particular time. So it led to exodus of more than 4 lakh Kashmiri Pandits who overnight had to leave their home and earth, including my own family. And my family, in fact, left between 19th and 20th January 1919 and had to stay in Jammu. We were staying in a garage, which was basically one room, and we were more than a dozen people there, and which was actually a garage connected to a cow shed. And that's where, we spent initial weeks or months after the Exodus began. So what you asked me is a very long question, a very vast question. A lot has changed in Kashmir. Recently, post the abrogation of Article 370 in 2019, a lot has changed as well. But there needs to be a consistent approach where we target terrorism, where we target separatism, and we also counter radicalization at the grassroots level. Right. If we don't do that in a consistent manner, then I'm afraid this is a vicious circle of gory death, barbaric killings, and a bloody terrorism that we've seen over the 3 decades in Kashmir.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And to an extent, these Islamist groups have justified why they have pushed Hindu and Kashmiri Hindus out of the valley. But in the recent string of attacks, they've been even targeting migrant workers who are going there. What do you think is the funda here? Why is this happening?
Sharon, first we'll have to understand, many people try to confuse the ordinary people, be it, ordinary masses, even the media, even the so-called intelligentsia, that it's a political problem. Kashmir is a political problem. We need a political dialogue for a solution. That's absurd. The roots of the problem are in Islamist terrorism. The roots are in Islamist groups backed by, unfortunately, some mainstream politicians and separatists as well, who actually want a Nizam-e-Mustafa, who actually want an Islamist state with Islamic Sharia law to be adopted in Jammu and Kashmir. That will never happen. Indian government will never let it happen. The ordinary Kashmiri will also never let it happen, because they have borne the fruits of India's democracy and secularism. They've seen how India is such a vast country, how the education system in India is flourishing so much. Kashmiris, Kashmiri Muslims mainly, who reside presently, because Kashmiri Pandits have been ousted. There are just a few hundred left in the valley now. So Kashmiri Muslims who work, who study all across in Indian, institutions, from IIT to IIM to top medical colleges, AIMS, etc., know that, once an Islamist society actually comes into existence, where terrorism is the, order of the day, where Hizbul Mujahideen and Jaish-e-Mohammed will rule, there will be no education, there'll be no progress, there'll be no development, there'll be no money in their bank accounts.
Right.
So that is the reason.
You did mention, sorry, please go ahead.
Go ahead. Ask me.
You did briefly mention about how India was hell-bent on finding a political solution because that it was perceived to be a political problem for a very long time. You've also reported and broken several stories about how the separatist leaders, including Syed Gilani, had particular ties with leaders outside. I mean, leaders in POK and Pakistan clearly as well. And there have been many raids in the past as well. So do you think, in reflection and in retrospect, India lost those several years trying to negotiate with people who we considered allies?
Firstly, I'll tell you, the recent spate of attacks against the minorities and the migrant workers that have taken place from Bihar, from UP, from West Bengal, from MP. It's again Pakistan's frustration. It is Pakistan's frustration because after the abrogation of Article 370 in 2019, they couldn't unite the so-called Muslim world against India. They couldn't generate any kind of a diplomatic support. So it was almost like India's coup in Jammu and Kashmir. India said that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India, and this is an internal change. And which were the initial countries who supported this? Maldives, UAE, US, who said that, we have nothing to do with this. Why should we comment? It's an internal affair of India. India has been doing whatever it has to. And that's what happened. India prevailed over Pakistan. And Pakistan in itself has its internal economic challenges, radical challenges, etc. That's a vast topic for another day. So the minority killings and the migrant worker killings are another spate where Pakistan has not been able to channel funds into Jammu and Kashmir. You mentioned the raids that have taken place and the links that the radical separatists, the Hurriyat Conference, the JKLF, etc., have had with Pakistan. So they've been supported, not just morally or ideologically, but financially. Through Hawala links, they have been receiving money through middlemen who are businessmen, including, one gentleman called Zahoor Ahmad Batali, who is currently in the Tihar jail, who was one of the major conspirators supplying money and resources to these separatist organizations. So we have dozens of separatists today, including family members of Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, including Bitta Karate and Yasin Malik, including Shabbir Shah and Dukhtarani Millat's Andrabi and several others who are currently in Tihar jail. And I don't see them getting out anytime soon. So the entire conflict industry of Hurriyat Conference, separatism, supported by Pakistan, funded by Pakistan, has collapsed right now in Kashmir. What you have, Sharon, also seen over the last few years is that the stone pelting that was seen on every corner of Srinagar or South Kashmir does not happen suddenly. Why doesn't it? The youth are the same, the family members are the same, the people are the same in villages. Why has it changed? It has changed because the money supply of these terror organizations, separatists, has cut off completely. There is a lot still to be achieved by the NIA, by the JNK police, the security forces, and the intelligence. But some extraordinary steps have been taken since 2017 onwards. I do really hope that this is a consistent approach, because there's a lot of corruption also that goes into this conflict industry in Kashmir, and that needs to be nipped in the bud in the months and the years from now.
Right. And, as January 19th approaches, I think the Islamist side also have their PR machinery in place, because I see a lot of young kids, college going kids, folks who are posting about how, it's not really about Hindus and Muslims. It's not about those binaries. It's not even about the problem with the Indian state. It's about Kashmiris having their land to themselves, which implies that Pandits or anybody else apart from Muslims do not belong to that land. And when said so, they say that, oh, history has changed. Now that it belongs to Muslims, people need to acknowledge for what it is. So in that sense, do you think that the actual history of Kashmir is being wiped out by the Islamist invasions that happened, perhaps even post-partition for that matter?
Last I heard, Indian constitution prevailed in Jammu and Kashmir. Yes, there was a Ranbir panel code for many years, but that has changed now. Article 370 has been put into the dustbin of history, and it's not going to return. The politicians may play some kind of a gimmick. They might even approach the Supreme Court of India, which they have, and they have the right as Indians, as any Indian has. They can knock the doors of the judiciary. They can knock the doors of the investigative agencies. They can knock the doors of the government. But such discriminatory laws had to go, and I'm glad that something that should have happened decades ago has happened now. So there has been discrimination, there has been manipulation, there has been a narrative that has been set up, a propaganda over the years. One, a propaganda, internal propaganda, which I say in Kashmir, where the common Kashmiris are fooled by politicians, separatists, others, which includes a large chunk of the local media as well, who say that, no, you have to fight for Azadi, you have to fight for jihad, you're being discriminated. Kashmir only belongs to Kashmiris and nobody else. Pandits cannot come, Hindus cannot come, nobody from across India can come. This is a very exclusivist kind of a mindset, a very kind of a communal mindset that has been seen in Kashmir over the years. And that is the reason that Kashmiri Pandits today do not feel comfortable to return. We do want to return someday. We do want justice to happen. But for that, there needs to be a conducive atmosphere in Kashmir. So historically seen that history has been manipulated. The Western press, the kind of reportage it did after the abrogation of Article 370, one would have thought, thousands of people are being killed in Kashmir every day, which is not reality. I mean, I was in Kashmir after the abrogation, and I didn't see any massive protests. Yes, India is a democracy, and that's why there were a couple of protests. I, as a journalist, as a Kashmiri, said that Indian government was wrong, even though for some time they did, cut the internet for a year or so. They should have, been a little generous, realistic, and because common students, etc., did not like it, did not, suffered a lot in that process. So yes, one has to criticize one's own government when it has to. But the reality remains there was a lot of propaganda that came from the Western press, including Al Jazeera, New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, etc., who did not see how Article 370 was discriminatory in nature, was discriminating against the Dalit, against the Kashmiri women who did not have property rights in Kashmir, and the Dalits who were seen as second-class citizens by the Kashmiris. And that has ended with the abrogation of 370 now.
Right. Thank you so much for putting this into perspective. I know that we are short on time, but let me ask you my last question. What is the way forward? Because when I speak to national security experts, even commanding officers in Kashmir, what they tell me is that, look, terrorism cannot be completely ended. So there is always going to be a speck of it here and there, and that is the way we must deal. So in that sense, can the valley ever see peace? And if it does, can we see a complete rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits once again to the valley?
There are, again, various aspects to your question. One is the return of Kashmiri Pandits. I do not see a return of Kashmiri Pandits happening immediately. It may take a lot of time for that to happen, because it's been 3 decades. Most of the Kashmiri Pandits have started from scratch, rebuild their lives, including my family. And why will anyone go to a land where terrorism still flourishes, where people are still being killed because they're Hindus, where there is still not as much development as there should have been because of separatism and because of these radical elements who did not want Kashmiris to flourish and be developed. So I personally see that there is a two-pronged approach that has been there since 2017, but has to be there in a more aggressive manner. And this two-pronged approach is one, development, and secondly, de-radicalization. We see terrorism, we see killings taking place, terror attacks taking place, and then after that, we see a counter-terror operation where encounters happen and terrorists are eliminated. A record number of terrorists were killed last year as well. Jaish-e-Mohammed, completely top brass, was again eliminated in Kashmir Valley. We do not have many trained, Kashmiri terrorists anymore. They just have weapons, etc., but they do not know how to use it very well. That's why we see an encounter starts, and within the next 1 hour, the encounter ends because the terrorists do not know how to operate in such kind of an atmosphere. So we have to realize that we may kill terrorists and the terrorists may kill innocents, but this is a vicious cycle. How will you end it? How will you end this terrorism? We have to realize that we do not have to only kill terrorists. We have to kill terrorism. We do not have to eliminate only radicals in the society. We have to eliminate radicalism. So the root cause is when in common villages of Kashmiris, in Kulgam, in Shopian, in Pulwama, in Anantnag, where the Friday prayers happen, after that, there is a radicalization session that happens by the local Molvi, who continues to radicalize the youth and say that, you have to wage a jihad, a war against the Indian state. You are not Indian. You have to do this, you have to do that. And that Molvi is seen like a godly figure. Whatever he says has to be abided by. So these Molvis have to be educated. They have to be told that you need to preach Islam. You need to preach the positive aspects of Islam. You need to preach how education is very important, how equality is very important, how drugs are a menace in the society in Kashmir, and how people can rebuild their lives together, unitedly. And secularism is the way forward, just like the Indian Constitution says. So we have to end this radicalization at the grassroots level. Till we do that, terrorists will continue to mushroom. We'll have terror attacks, and again, we'll have a record number of terrorists being killed. But again, there will be another generation coming every year. So that has a vicious circle that has to be broken. Secondly, on the development front, a lot has been achieved. A lot of MOUs have been done by the Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha. But realistically, a lot of hospitals, a lot of hotels, a lot of infrastructure, factories, outlets have to be built in the Kashmir Valley so that job generation also happens. People get busy, with work, with entertainment, theaters. The radical society and the Islamists have not allowed theaters to flourish ever since 1990. So theaters have to be built in Kashmir. You need to have art, cinema, entertainment, music in the society. We need to have more sports facilities, more sports for the common people, and that's how this entire society will change. It's not an overnight process. I see it as a long-term, 10-year-long, year-long plan. And certainly, I think the government is in the right direction. But as I said, it has to be a sustained plan for Jammu and Kashmir, for rebuilding Jammu and Kashmir, as they say, Naya Kashmir. It cannot happen in overnight situation. And all political parties, all ideologies, etc., have to play a role in this. And we have to be as Indians first in Jammu and Kashmir. That's how the road ahead should be.
Very beautifully put. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if I may ask one last question, this is from my side personally. Congratulations, you've been issued death threats even by ISIS now. So how do you operate, from a journalist to a journalist? We may read about Kashmir, but you are the ones who are operating then from there, from ground zero. So do you ever even get intimidated? I mean, because this is not just a one-time occurrence, right? I'm sure this would keep on recurring from time to time.
Threats are a part of the job. When you are a conflict reporter, when unfortunately, you are from a land where there has been terrorism over the years. My life actually began with terrorism because, I was just a few months old when we had to leave Kashmir and, then a refugee camp and then finally rebuild our lives in Delhi. So this has been part and parcel of the entire process. Initially, even before I started my career in media, I was briefly in my college days an activist. And at that time as well, I fought a case where a very powerful person was involved who finally got a death sentence and then they later reduced to life sentence. So at that time also, I was young, 17, 18-year-old kid, and threats were there. But it only struck me much later that, this was a very crazy thing that I was getting into. So similarly, I mean, I received these emails recently, so-called ISIS, but I know it's actually Pakistani ISI and the terror groups that are behind me. They do not like my social media posts or my so-called utterings, in the media against them, exposing them day and night. So these are job. I think I do not get intimidated by them. I mean, Kashmir belongs to us, and we will rebuild Kashmir. I may be there, I may not be there. That does not matter. The state, the country, the nation is much bigger than an individual. And I think I'm playing a very small role in this entire process as a journalist, as an Indian, as a Kashmiri. And my message to ISIS is that, you may try these pranks, these threats, not just, Pakistani ISI or the terror groups, even Khalistanis. You may try to call me, call my, people who know me and threaten, but this is not going to work. It's childish. You do not have the guts to, do anything. And I mean, we trust the Indian security forces, the army, the JNK police, the local police of any state, for that matter, intelligence agencies.
Right.
So my message to them is that relax. I'm going to Kashmir. I went to Kashmir in July. I spent a month in Kashmir without any kind of a security. So we will continue to do that, and we will return to Kashmir.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I would like you to know that young journalists like myself will really look up to you, because we think that you're the ones who are putting your lives at risk. And thank you so much for inspiring us.
Thank you so much, Sharon. All the best.
It was a pleasure talking to you. And I hope you can join us again for a conversation.
Surely, would love to. Thank you.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.